Welcome to a bonus episode of Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's August 4th, 2025. Well, let's get to some headlines. This week in the threat picture, China's commercial space industry is booming, and if the U.S. doesn't figure out how to regulate, partner, or compete fast, we may just hand them low Earth orbit on a silver platter. So China's state-backed surge into commercial space is accelerating, fueled by policy support and private innovation, challenging U.S. dominance as thousands of low Earth orbit satellites come online. While U.S. firms like SpaceX lead in launch volume, proposed regulatory rollbacks and a shift from safety to commerce raises big concerns about how and whether the U.S. will manage this orbital surge responsibly, with projections showing low Earth orbit LEO satellites growing from about 7,400 in 2023 to over 42,000, so almost 6x, by 2032, and China pushing beyond domestic needs to target global markets. This, quote, fail fast, learn faster mentality has been at the core of American space industry. But what are your thoughts on the new-ish space race and how the U.S. competes with Chinese commercial space companies that are inherently dual use? We've talked about this before with the Chinese government, the nature of the Chinese government and their national control of their institutions, Sue.
Man, so many rich sub-threads on this one. What's happening in commercial technology writ large, technology that is developed outside of governmental control, but with security, impact, and value, is really quite amazing and challenging from a governance perspective. And we'll probably need to spend more time on U.S. commercial space in general and what I think it can afford in terms of supporting human activity, whether that is security or whether that is just human activity on Earth, to include what we talked about with Kerrville and other things. But what's going on in commercial space technology is absolutely eye-watering. In a weird parallel with AI, it's being governed disproportionately by market forces right now. And so, well, actually, it's kind of dually being controlled by market forces and over government regulations. So we'll kind of hit both those. The market forces it's just moving so fast, developing capabilities, people launching things as fast as they can. It is a bit of an arcane subject, but there are lots and lots and lots of incidents of either collisions or near avoidance. So responsible use of space is super important. The big companies, SpaceX, Eutelsat, OneWeb, there are a lot of people that are very much about the responsible use of space and already do sharing of data to try and minimize the impact. I think one of the things you're going to have to do is you're almost going to have to create a working capital fund where if you want to throw something up there, you have to put some set of money into the hopper in order to be able to manage deconflictions and tracking and debris removal and all those sorts of things. It's super exciting. It's not going to get less. Man, there is a total advantage to being high up and looking down and being able to see more area. What's happening with sensors in order to be able to detect activity predictively, what LEO is great for in terms of revisit and being able to see the same place over and over and over again, whether that is using that for national security or using that for disaster response. I think there's just so much benefit. But if we don't find some way in order to be responsible about it, it's like the conundrum is the more dependent we get on it, the more impact there will be of some tragic outcome. So that's just one element of the commercial use. I think you've probably got a couple others that you've mentioned to me before. One is China's dual use, and the other is how do you regulate it? To the point about China, man, China's going great guns, and I think there are lessons to be had here. They are sometimes late to the party, AI, but when they go, they have a very different approach of whole of country, whole of government, a whole of industry response. And when they decide to move, they move and they undercut. And so you can imagine a circumstance where the U.S. decides that it wants to overregulate its commercial space industry for myriad reasons. We want to make sure that we're not giving away any secrets or giving away any technology. They're under-regulating it, and people are looking at the benefits of commercial low Earth orbits, and the market actually moves to China, even though we have a significant lead in terms of capabilities now. So there are lots of dimensions to this one.
Later this year, 50% of their capability is going to be in communications with their satellites. Think Starlink from SpaceX type deal where they're allowing communications in remote areas. And that's part of their Belt and Road and Silk Road initiatives to get the soft power piece that we talked about last time. They're also producing significantly more and launching more image analysis satellites than they have a domestic need for. So they're going to be looking to the international market. One thing I wanted to follow up on with you, though, was you mentioned that possibility of like a holding fund or something in terms of providing deconfliction and funding that. Would that come from like a launch tax or something, or would that be pooled resources among the companies, or how do you think that would get implemented?
I like a launch tax just because if you're throwing it up there, you ought to be responsible, and how it gets allocated and who's controlling it and how do you make sure you have your fair share. I think, we've solved those problems so many times before. To your point about China and its market, just kind of bouncing back to that, what I think the last 5 years, especially in the Ukraine crisis, has demonstrated to everyone is I need sovereign intelligence, right? I need intelligence capabilities. It is available commercially. And when it's available commercially, I don't have to worry whether the US is going to be a good partner or not. I can just buy the capability. But remember, just like in broadband communications, China can discount their services massively. And so now you have people who want the capability, they can get it at a 40% discount. Again, we want forces of good and free and open societies to dominate. We have an opportunity with our commercial markets to serve not only our needs, but international needs. We do need to be more responsible, but if we don't step into the moment, China's got every ability to step into it, just like their GPS equivalent, Baidu. If you want to get on and you're not in the United States or you're being denied it at all, you can use theirs. So even though it's commercial, it is a potential impact on national and global security if we don't manage this moment well.
And we're currently ahead. Right? I think they
Certainly.
started really taking a look at this capability back in like 2014 or something like that. And we have some really good companies that offer these services, but if we don't support them, then they're going to fall behind. The backdrop of all of this is a potential executive order that would dramatically reshape how we manage space launches and orbital safety, which you talked about some of the deconfliction already. It proposes shifting mission authority from the Department of Transportation, which is traditionally focused on safety, to the Department of Commerce, which would prioritize industry growth. The executive order also aims to streamline regulation, targeting the FAA's Part 450 rules, which ballooned into a 53-page document despite initial promises of simplicity. Those rules are basically governing launch in terms of launch safety. The FAA does report that they complete about 98% of the reviews within the 180-day window, but critics of this are saying that statistic ignores pre-review negotiations and structural delays. Finally, the EO would dismantle the Office of Space Commerce Traffic Coordination System, raising fears of orbital chaos just as satellite congestion explodes. The Pentagon maintains its own tracking system. They have something called Space Track, but both defense and industry leaders warn that placing traffic management under DoD risks conflating public safety with military priorities. So the administration wants to get rid of the TRAX program of this orbital space deconfliction system because of project overruns. It's not completed yet. And they believe that private companies, quote, have the capability and the business model to do space traffic coordination on their own. That's initially where my mind went. Let market forces figure it out. If someone has an interest in their satellites not getting run into and create a deconfliction system, then that's probably going to be better and ultimately cost us taxpayers less money. So what are kind of your thoughts on this executive order and those roughly three buckets it would apply to?
You might have to remind me of all the buckets.
Yeah. We'll start at the top of mission authority, going transportation, DOT,
Yep.
to commerce.
Okay, so we have a little bit of a problem anyway, is that space used to be the purview of the DoD. There's a huge infrastructure, there's a trained workforce, there's expertise, there's expectation. The problem is that the DoD is all about secure systems, and if the DoD were to keep control of it. And I think they recognize this. You would miss the commerce opportunity, right? The problem is transportation and commerce are woefully under expertised and under history in terms of being able to take on a problem this big. In other words, I just told you that the DoD wasn't the right place. I also told you that with all the investment the DoD has made, they're not sufficient. I probably like it in transportation more, but transportation or commerce, either one could do it, but you got to invest. And so then that takes you to your second bucket is who's paying for it. You described it really well, but I put one caveat on it. It's super expensive because we built bespoke systems as we always have for national security and their derivative of national security. There are commercial capabilities that could be super well used for some of these things. There are companies that are in the space tracking, space management. I have no association with either of these companies, but LeoStella and Privateer are just two of them that are in this business. So there are solutions available if the U.S. government would actually talk to the commercial sector about real requirements that I think could overcome some of the prohibitive costs that we see in straight up government-led programs and get us faster there. We just are not well positioned for localities, whether that's a company or whether that's state and local, to be able to create something bigger than themselves in a world where the solutions require more global coverage. So yes, I think the technologies are available outside the government, but this is one of my mantras is there are some problems that are just big enough that this is what you need a federal government to do. But for goodness sake, let's start doing it in a modern way. And just total aggression. I was looking at the finding that just came out about Doge actually costing us $21 billion. I think that is what maddened me the most about the Doge effort is not that the idea wasn't good to look at things that could be done way better than we currently do them, especially in a world where the line has blurred between government and private sector in terms of capability that's available. But you have to do it sensibly, and that's should be something that the government is expected to do. So that was 2. What was the third one?
Is there even a need for the TRAX program with Space Track and the DoD system, which I think you kind of answered with both those other 2.
Yeah. Listen, I don't think we're coming back from the use of space. Let's talk at a later time about what happens when every asset on orbit is both commercial, civilian, and security, and how do you manage that? Fresh off cyber that we're not very good at protecting ourselves against. Now we're going to have a space policy that protects us against the same sort of blurred lines between those things. So I think maybe we ought to come back later and talk a little bit about how you secure space when some of the assets that you depend on societally are not controlled by the government.
42,000 doesn't seem like that much, but it's the big sky, little airplane idea, right? I don't think we're necessarily going to get to the scene from Wall-E where the whole horizon is covered in satellites. But to your point about should the government be involved, I don't know how much a commercial company is going to have the negotiating power internationally. It almost seems like an international issue. We're talking about China here, but there's many other countries that are putting satellites up and directing their own communications. And is a commercial company going to have the negotiating power if their system's good enough and they can entice everyone to use their platform internationally? But I'm not so sure that they're going to have that negotiating power.
Yeah, I don't know that they're going to have the negotiating power. I do think that, China is just so aggressive in these areas where they deem that it is competitive advantage. And we've talked about this before. Russia's aim is to undermine democracy, particularly that which is practiced by the West. And China's aim is to win the global competition so that their system is the one that dominates. And then those are very different imperatives, but this is a battle space for them. And all you need to do is look at 15 years ago, maybe 5, even national security assets China was putting on orbit. So pretty interesting. I think we have a lot of places we can go with this topic going forward. I will say that at some point, our companies are going to have to seriously embrace the fact that they are national security decision makers. Right. Not all of them, not expected to carry all the weight of national security, but in the choices they make, they are making choices for our security. So we'll come back around to that.
Tax is an interesting idea. to explore some other time too. Good way to fund some of that stuff. That's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Thank you for joining us. As always, remember, we're here for you. Look for a link to the show notes to provide feedback or suggest topics for the next time. I'm told that feedback is a gift, and Eric and I both believe it because we give each other feedback a lot. Join us next week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another.